I think there are millions of business models just by leveraging what already exists out there in the marketplace. So we are here with the Business Model Lab, and our goal really is to help people develop their ideas of business models that they can apply to the carbon removal space. And we'll do that by looking at technologies, whether they're novel technologies or existing technologies or businesses, even in sort of non-carbon removal markets. And we'll see how those might apply to carbon removal. And the goal here is hopefully by having these conversations, stimulating people's entrepreneurial minds, we can get a few folks a little bit further down the road in launching their business or developing the concept that will become their business. So thank you all for joining. We've got a really special guest. I'm very excited to have Tom Green from Project Vesta on today. So I'm going to give him a very brief intro, but I'm sure Tom can do a much better job of introducing himself. Tom is director of Project Vesta. I believe that's a relatively newer role for him, maybe in the last year or so. He's got an MBA from Harvard, a BA from Oxford. He's worked in fintech for quite some time, and also spent some time with the consulting firm Bain & Company, and now he's doing Project Vesta. So that's the brief intro. Admittedly, stuff I just pulled off of his LinkedIn page, so I'll let Tom fill in the details. Spend a little bit of time just talking about what he's doing at Project Vesta. I kind of teed him up with some points that I think would be relevant for this group, and then we'll make sure we have plenty of time, maybe at least a half an hour, for this group to fire some questions away and dig deeper on things that are of interest to us. Tom, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Good morning, everyone. Very nice to meet you all. So as Jeremy said, I'm the executive director of Project Vesta. I've been involved with the project since last year, and it's a non-profit, sort of based in San Francisco, but very much a distributed team, which of course in these days is becoming, I think, more and more normal. I've got a presentation that I'm going to share my screen and walk you all through to just sort of give you the basic idea of what this is, how it works, how we're thinking about scaling it, and so on. And I'd love to jump in and brainstorm with the group about business models around this, because I think that's we're a nonprofit right now, but in order to scale this to the kind of scale to actually have a significant impact on the world, there are going to need to be business models. So without further ado, let me share my screen and I can jump into this presentation.
Tom, I just made you a co-host, so I think that enables you now to share your screen, but let me know if you have any issues.
I think I can, yeah. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Good to go.
We're good.
Great. Okay. I'll just move this window around a little bit. Okay. So we're Project Vesta. Our mission is to help reverse climate change by turning 1 trillion tons of atmospheric carbon dioxide into rock. And I mean, of course, I'm living in California, probably some of you are as well, and just, you don't have to look much further than what's going on right now to realize the urgency of doing something about this. So certainly it's very, very timely. See if I can get this to work. So I'll be brief here because I'm sure everyone probably knows this, but emissions have been growing rapidly. If you look at what the IPCC's models say we need to do, we need to roughly halve net emissions by the end of this decade and get to net zero by mid-century. And we're very clearly not on track to do those things. And so what we need to do is remove tens of gigatons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by the end of this decade. And there is currently no clear path to doing that. There are no technologies that can scale to that level and do it reasonably economically. So we've really got a situation on our hands here. The good news is that nature actually has a way to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So for billions of years, this has been going on. When rain falls on volcanic rocks, like olivine, for example, and other volcanic rocks, it triggers a chemical reaction which removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But specifically what it does is it shifts the equilibrium in solution from carbonic acid to bicarbonate. That bicarbonate is then used by marine calcifying organisms and ends up, when those organisms die, as ocean sediment and ultimately turns into limestone on the ocean floor. So that's fantastic news. We have this way, nature already has this way of capturing carbon dioxide and has captured trillions of tons that way. The problem is it happens over geological timescales. So the question then is, how do we speed that up? The answer is we have this elegant way to accelerate the natural process. So we take these olivine rocks, grind them down into sand, transport them to beaches, and there the wave action causes the particles to tumble against each other, breaking down and dissolving, which massively accelerates the natural process of capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into the water and ultimately into limestone on the ocean floor. So here's how that works. We take olivine, which is a very abundant volcanic mineral. Primarily it's magnesium silicate in a mineral called fosterite. We take that olivine, we take it to a beach, we create a green sand beach, mimicking the natural one. So that's a photograph of Papakalea on the big island of Hawaii, which is a natural green sand beach made of olivine. And so once we take the olivine to the beach, the wave energy, which of course is free, it really is the key to this. The mechanical action there tumbles the olivine, causing it to break down. So that's how it works. One of the things that got me really excited about this project when I started to learn about it was just the sheer scalability. So that first chart on the left-hand side shows you it's actually an incomplete list. Each of those red dots is an olivine reserve. There are actually many more than that in the world. So olivine is available throughout the world, and it's also relatively shallow in the Earth's crust. If we take that olivine to 2% of global shelf seas, we can capture 100% of human emissions. So there's enough olivine, there's enough coastline, and then finally the cost. It can be extremely cheap. We have a vision of getting it down to $10 a ton. I want to be very clear that that's a long-term vision. We're not close to $10 a ton of carbon capture at this point. Nonetheless, we do think we can get there. So the scalability of this technique is something that we believe in very strongly. So just to double click a little bit in the cost there, when you look at other technologies such as direct air capture or industrial capture through solid sorbent, these are significantly more expensive than coastal enhanced weathering, which is what this technique is called. And so, we believe that we can actually capture carbon dioxide, as I mentioned, at about $10 a ton in the long term. Even at the moment, we're in the sort of low triple digits in terms of our initial deployments. So the other good thing about this is that it is permanent carbon capture. So just like unlike for example, afforestation, which don't get me wrong, I love trees. We should plant trees, but there are a lot of risks with that in terms of the permanence of carbon capture, and it's obviously important that we do capture carbon permanently. So Project Vesta, what are we actually doing in all of this? There's been about 30 years of research into coastal enhanced weathering, and where we are today, as you can see on the chart, is we're at a technology readiness level of 4. So it's been proven that this works in the lab, but there have been no in situ studies, no real life beach experiment prove that this worked. And it's been very clear for a number of years that beach experiments are what are needed, yet they haven't been happening. And so we exist to help this technology, so-called cross the chasm, and actually take it to a point of technology readiness where private and government capital are actually attracted into it in order to fund global deployment. So yeah, right now that hasn't been happening, so we exist to fill that gap. We are currently making preparations for this first beach pilot, which is the clear next step in the project. And so this is you can see these photographs of our test beach. So that photo on the bottom left shows you that we actually have the test beach on the right and a control beach on the left. And so there'll be olivine deployed at the test beach and not at the control beach. And then we will be measuring what's going on both in the water and in the sediment to see the carbon capture, to see what's happening with the local marine ecosystem. And as Leonard mentioned, these types of interventions actually de-acidify the ocean locally. And so what we are hoping to see is that actually there are benefits to the local marine ecosystem, as well as carbon dioxide capture. And so, as I mentioned, what we're really trying to do is pave the way for scale deployment and get us to this point where we have a integrated set of protocols and algorithms that we can give to governments, to NGOs, to companies that will enable deployments to happen anywhere in the world. And so our key outcome as Project Vesta is to give the world that blueprint for deployment. As I mentioned, we're a nonprofit. We're raising $2.5 million to fund the pilot beaches and scale our work. That's been going well. We've raised $500,000 already this year. Stripe made a purchase. Stripe made the first purchase ever of negative emissions through coastal enhanced weathering, and we were one of 4 organizations that Stripe purchased from. And one thing to mention there is that the money from Stripe was actually a purchase of future negative emissions rather than a donation. We're also very pleased to have been getting some good press this year, starting to hit the mainstream with the MIT Tech Review and Fast Company. Yeah, like I mentioned, we're raising $2.5 million. So if any of you know anyone who has philanthropic leanings in this space, then that would be certainly appreciate any introductions. But I also know that we're here to talk about business models, and so I just want to riff on that a little bit, maybe then open it up to questions and discussion. So we're a nonprofit, and the reason we're a nonprofit is because if you look at this kind of intervention and what we're doing, we're putting olivine sand down in the ocean, and that's a pretty controversial thing to do. I mean, I'm sure everyone's probably familiar with the iron fertilization experiments that have got an extremely bad name because they were not done with scientific rigor. And so one of the key planks of our ethos is having a broad network of scientists, having a broad scientific consensus around what we're doing. We believe that the path to global deployment is paved with the rigor and transparency that comes with academic peer-reviewed research. And as distinct from something like direct air capture, where you can build a plant on private land, capture the carbon, take literally physically the carbon that you've captured and do something with it. We're not in that situation. We're putting rocks down in the ocean and on beaches, and there's going to be, frankly, a lot of concern with that, and a lot of people are going to say geoengineering is bad, and all of those things. And so we really need to have a broad scientific consensus. And as a nonprofit, we have a lot more credibility. We have a lot more to build that broad network of experts in the field who can do the research at our beaches, who can validate what we're doing, and ultimately we strongly believe that being a nonprofit is the way to achieve that. Having said all of that, I come from the for-profit world. This is my first nonprofit leadership role, and we on the team firmly believe that in order to get this to significant scale, we'll need a for-profit ecosystem, and that's definitely something that we're planning to be involved in booting up. I think the right timing for that is probably 1 to 2 years out. The the first beach experiment is starting right now. We'll probably have kind of peer-reviewed results on that, I would say, in about 2 years. I mean, that's how long this kind of science takes. And so, if people start companies around this now, then I think there's actually a lot of risk that coming out of the gate too early, jumping the gun before the science is demonstrated, is actually very risky, I think, for the creation of this ecosystem. On the other hand, once we have the science demonstrated, I think we need an ecosystem of for-profit companies who are going to build sensors to measure the CO2 removal, who are going to deploy olivine on beaches and get paid for the negative emissions, and so on. So that's how we're thinking about business models around this.
So can I try to put
so
that?
Maybe I'll pause there and see what questions people have.
Can I try to put that another way, Tom? And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, or would you say that Project Vesta's reason for being really is to jumpstart the enhanced mineralization industry by being an objective player without sort of overt financial interests, really just trying to develop models and peer-reviewed data that others can then come and copy to globalize this industry? Absolutely.
I mean, honestly, I couldn't have put it better myself. But yeah, I mean, we exist to further the science of enhanced weathering to galvanize global deployment. And so, yeah, absolutely.
Luckily, this is being recorded, so you can go back later and write it down.
Yeah, you can borrow that one, right?
Few questions from the strategic to the tactical. I'll start with a larger strategic question. Tom, you just mentioned that you're planning on using carbon credits for reinforcing your project financing. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean we've sold negative emissions to Stripe already. We'd love to sell more. So that's definitely part of the model.
Are you considering marketplaces, like Nori or Puro or other types of places where, say, corporate CSRs can come into contact with projects that you are conducting?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just the reality of where we are at the moment is, we haven't even deployed olivine on our first beach yet. So, it's just very early days for us to be able to sell negative emissions. And Stripe very much had this, what I think is a great and very kind of visionary approach, which is to say, we want to support emerging technologies by buying your future negative emissions. Right. And we have a lot of patience about when you're going to be able to deliver those. So right. Stripe's been great to work with on that front. So, we definitely plan to work with, Nori and other marketplaces, and also sell directly to corporations. But at the moment we don't really have that much to sell, so we're not sort of aggressively pursuing that path yet,
except for the few really bleeding edge adopters who would do an ex ante transaction rather than an ex post transaction. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
So that whole aspect of what you just mentioned is one of the things I wanted to see if we could dive into a little bit deeper. There's two sides to this. One is, was there a financial incentive for Stripe to do this as a kind of future carbon credit purchase versus doing it just as a donation to the nonprofit, right? Because there's an aspect there of when we're all trying to sell ourselves to an investor, whether it's from give us the cash now or pre-buy something is what they're essentially doing. You got to understand it. What's the financial incentive from their side? So I'm curious if you understood it from their perspective.
Yeah, I mean they this approach very much came from them. So, they put an RFP out there saying we would like to pre-purchase negative emissions from emerging technologies. And the reason that they wanted to do it that way rather than as a donation was because they're interested, and they have a net zero goal, of which this is a part. But they very much wanted to not just give money, but also spur the creation of these industries. And so by making a purchase, they force us to come up with a price, for example, for what the emissions are worth. And they wanted to start spurring the creation of this market rather than just giving money. So it very much came from them.
They wanted to be first down the path and have others follow.
Absolutely, yeah. And they've definitely been leaders in this space from a corporate perspective. And, Microsoft came out with their big announcement about net zero after Stripe did, for example. So, I think they've definitely been having an influence.
Do you feel that there was also a little bit of them forcing the issue with you to make sure you had all your financial numbers kind of ironed out?
I mean, I think that I think for them it's sort of all wrapped up together. This concept of, when we make a purchase, we help to create the market and spur the ecosystem. And so, I guess in a way, yes, they wanted to, I think they wanted to have that. Maybe for them, as they designed this process, they felt there would be more accountability involved, right? Because if they just give money to a nonprofit, then that's just money they've donated, but if they buy something, then they know that they're going to maintain a relationship with us as we give them updates on how it's going, and as we give them updates on how much of those negative emissions we've delivered over time. So I think it creates more of an ongoing relationship too.
Tom, I'm sure that there are some things about the relationship and the nature of the future offtake contract with Stripe that you can't disclose, but I'm just sort of curious mechanically how that. I actually get a kick out of trying to imagine lawyers developing a contract for coupons for future negative emissions that haven't yet been delivered at a price that is yet to be determined. But I'm just wondering, at least can you tell us, are there sort of parameters, like the price will be between certain goalposts, and is there a time period in which those will be delivered, or else the contract becomes invalid? I guess I'm kind of wanting to dive into a bit of the nitty gritty of how that works.
Yeah, it's actually simpler than you think, and a lot of this is public, so I can share. The price is $75 a ton that we are charging them, and to be completely frank, we came up with that price based on some understanding of what it's going to cost us to deliver those, but the reality is it's actually going to cost us more than that, but it's okay. We're a non-profit and we're partially funded by donations. So, that price is at the current scale for the next couple of years, that price is actually unrealistic, but we also will be delivering negative emissions at that all-in cost within the next few years. We have a specific time frame for delivering those negative emissions through 2023. So basically it's actually a relatively simple contract where we have to deliver those negative emissions within that time frame, and they've already paid us for them at that price. Mm-hmm. We keep them updated regularly on our progress.
And to be clear, the carbon would be drawn down officially by 2023.
Correct.
Rather than the project.
I have a couple questions. You mentioned, Tom, about an interest to talk business models. In one of your pictures, you showed a guy kind of standing on a beach, I don't know, hand dropping olivine, and I'm not sure what he was doing, but when you think about your deployment mechanisms, can you walk through that a little bit? And if you're thinking about business models and creating an ecosystem of people that you can sell to. Figuring out a way to automatically deploy or optimally deploy is something that folks are going to want to know. So that should be part of whatever package you're putting together. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. Yeah. So the picture you saw was not somebody dropping olivine on the beach. It
kind of looked that way. You might want to rethink that picture.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, maybe it's okay, but yeah, it's somebody taking samples actually at our pilot beach, because and by the way, just to sort of just to mention something around that, at our pilot beach, what we're doing is taking samples for a fairly significant period before we put olivine down on the beach. Then we'll put olivine down on the beach, and then we continue to sample and we see what changes. Plus, we have our control beach without any intervention, so we'll be able to really sort of do a good comparison and see what's going on. So that's a sampling photo. The plan for scale deployment is self-unloading bulk carriers. So the olivine will be taken from mines and quarries by truck or rail to ports. It'll be mined and quarried, then it'll be ground down to sand, or actually more like gravel size, kind of 1 to 3 millimeters mostly, and transported to ports, put into bulk carriers at those ports, and then the ships will take it to deployment areas, and it will be unloaded by those ships in deployment areas. And one thing that's important here to say is that, we talk a lot about green sand beaches because we think green sand beaches are cool, and because our pilot experiments have to happen actually at beaches so we can measure everything. But when we get to scale deployment, we're actually talking about unloading tens of thousands of tons of olivine into coastal shelf sea areas directly from the sea. So that's how it'll work.
Can I probe that a little bit?
Please.
That helps clarify the supply side of how the olivine gets to the beach. Once it gets to the beach, how is it deployed? Do you just drive trucks up on the sand and then dump them and drag them along? I mean, I lived in Florida for a while, and they had to replenish the sand all the time, and that's how they did it. They just drove trucks onto the beach and just dropped it, and there you go. I mean, is there a more thoughtful process you guys go through, or is it pretty much that's it? You dump olivine on the beach and truck along until it's empty, and then load another truck?
Yeah, and you're talking about the so-called beach nourishment activities to combat erosion. And by the way, we think beach nourishment using olivine could be a great sort of win-win, right? Because if you need to put sand down anyway, why not put sand down that's going to capture carbon dioxide at the same time?
I can tell you from experience living in Florida for 10 years on the Gulf Coast, they're having to replenish their sand beaches all the time, and especially with rising sea levels, it erodes further. So yeah, I mean, there's a guaranteed market for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so for small deployments, there'll be trucks going to beaches, but then long term there'll be the only land transport will be at the supply end rather than the delivery end. So it'll be unloaded directly by ship into the water. And there won't be any trucks on land and that kind of thing, which by the way really helps with efficiency, because shipping is so much more efficient than land transport in terms of dollars per mile and carbon dioxide emissions per mile.
Yeah. Question about that, if I may. So you mentioned again, pilot projects are going to be on beaches. Great. When you're scaling, it's going to be in coastal waters, coastal shelf waters. Does the data suggest that you would get the same degree of carbon removal, by dumping into coastal waters versus on beaches?
It does, yeah. And you have to pick your coastal waters. And basically, what you need is enough mechanical activation. So there's quite a lot of research on this, and an example area that's been identified is the whole southern bight of the North Sea between the UK, France, Netherlands, Belgium, that sort of area. There's a lot of gravel transport on the seabed in that area, and so basically you've got strong coastal currents going on. And so if you put it down in those kind of areas, then those currents will actually cause the particle collisions. So our pilot beach is actually a pretty low energy place, and that's by choice. But when you think about putting olivine down in somewhere like the English Channel, where there's a lot of currents, or one of my favorite potential locations is the west coast of Namibia. It's an area called the Skeleton Coast, which I've actually visited before. It's called the Skeleton Coast because there have been so many shipwrecks there. The amount of wave energy and current there is enormous. So, and the water is nice and warm, relatively speaking, too, which helps to accelerate the chemical reaction. So putting olivine down there would actually be, from the sea, would result in much faster dissolution rate than we're going to see at our pilot beach.
As a follow-up, that's great. Sounds like warm waters with strong currents are the preferable, or the most optimized geographic locations. I wonder, based on your consideration of alkalinization, if deploying close to, say, coral reefs would have the carbon removal benefit and the reduced bleaching of coral reefs, again, Great Barrier Reef, etc., or other places. I don't know if those would be good locations as well.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. And of course, bleaching is a combination of ocean acidification and warming, and it's hard to separate the two effects. But nonetheless, I think tropical waters near coral reefs are a great place. I mean, the other thing where a lot of people are quite excited about the ocean alkalinization co-benefit is aquaculture. So we've spoken with oyster hatcheries in Oregon and that kind of thing, where they're experiencing huge die-offs because of ocean acidification. And so once this is demonstrated, the idea of using olivine to capture CO2 at sites where there's going to be that very specific co-benefit, particularly when it comes to shellfish. I think that's really exciting too. And then of course, anywhere where we do this, when you've got local communities who are fishing in the waters, who are relying on the local waters for their livelihoods, then that's great if we can I was going to say kill two birds with one stone. I'm not sure if that's quite the right metaphor.
Achieve two benefits achieve two benefits with literally one stone. Yes.
Exactly. Save two oysters with one stone.
Does that create a different legal risk that you also have to take into consideration? Because if you were to deploy the olivine in a certain area, and then there ends up being some quick near-term environmental change that affects the fishing in that area, for example, does that open you up to a potential lawsuit from the locals, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think one thing that's important to note here is that we're going through a rigorous process of measuring all that kind of thing, and so getting permits from we don't just do this. We have to get permits from government to do it. So at our pilot site, we're working closely with the government to make sure that a full environmental assessment has been done, to make sure that they're fully comfortable with what we're doing, and that gives us some protection, because then the country where we're doing it is actually supporting what we're doing and signing off on it. And of course, the hope is that there will be, and there's I think a very strong hypothesis that there'll be co-benefits, but we never quite know, and that's something that we're going to have to measure as we go. So I don't deny that there's some risk there.
So, but the local permitting process should provide you a bit of a legal shield in general. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And I apologize for dropping before. I'm in the Bay Area as well, and with our heat bloom right now, my air conditioners decided to crap out, so I'm trying to get them fixed as quickly as possible, and that was the repair guy. I did have a follow-on question from before, which was kind of stepping back, and I've been trying to understand the bigger picture framework around carbon capture. And I mean, if Stripe bought this pre-buy of carbon capture, somewhere along the line, somebody has to be seen as an independent third party monitor to say, Project Vesta says that this is going to remove X amount of carbon per year, and it's going to generate, you know, Y amount of carbon credits. We certify that. Again, being new to the whole thing here, is there an agency that has that kind of certification role in the bigger picture here?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say an agency.
Using that term loosely.
but right. But companies. So yeah, there are companies like Vera, Gold Standard, and there's a number of them that basically audit negative emissions, so there's an industry around that exists already, and of course our negative emissions have not been audited yet because they don't exist yet, but you know, we certainly plan to make sure that we have a mechanism for independent certification that our negative emissions are real.
And what's the link? Because in the end, carbon credit the carbon credit economy here is what's driving all of these businesses. So what's the link between the carbon credit the carbon credit regulations that create that economy and those audit firms?
Well, I mean, the carbon credit regulations really don't create the economy yet, at least not in the US, unfortunately. But you know, I mean, Stripe's purchase of negative emissions is entirely voluntary, right? They're doing this.
Right.
They're doing this because they think it's the right thing to do, which of course it is. And you know, other companies are doing that too. And you know, you do have some regulations like the 45Q in the tax code, and the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard, and you know, there are some regulations, but the reality is right now this is basically a voluntary market, and you know, what we're doing basically, the way we see our role is to you know, I believe that given where we are with climate change, and given that it's just going to get worse, at some point we're going to get to the point where governments, even the US government, mandates, you know, puts in place regulations that make sure carbon gets captured. And what we want to do is we want to pave the way for there to be a really cost-effective and permanent way to do that when it becomes something that is mainstream regulated. And you know,
yeah,
in the near term, it's going to be a, you know, modest market, still big enough for us to you know sell some significant amount of carbon credits. But I think in the long term, you know, it's going to be hundreds of billions.
Shameless plug time for next Wednesday, the 26th. Air Miners is hosting a 45Q deep dive. So
yeah,
hope to see you all there at noon Pacific.
Yeah, that should be great.
Yeah, I mean, part of where these questions are coming.
In case people don't know, 45Q was basically written by the oil industry, and so the you know, those tax credits that it gives do not apply to negative emissions from technologies like coastal enhanced weathering. You know, welcome to the way legislation works in this country.
Right.
Hence why this has all been voluntary to date.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to comment that, you know, I'm trying to pick up speed on a lot of different things that have been happening, and then part of it is I'm trying to also formulate a framework to understand this quickly. Just part of what I do coming from the technology world. So I appreciate everyone's patience with some of these questions.
Do you know there is a Dutch company as well selling olefin? Greensand, I believe, is their name. So they also already offer olefin to basically put on land as well. So you can like they have some showcases where, for instance, like along the tram line in Rotterdam, I think. They have olefin there. It seems to me that it must be less efficient because I suppose the particles will be bigger to begin with. But I don't know like how you position Project Vesta compared to them.
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple of thoughts. One is, you know, we're not trying to be. We don't care if other people. We'd love other people to do this, right? Like we're not trying to be the only ones. So you know, green sand. I'm glad they're doing what they're doing. You know, I think putting olivine down on train lines is a gimmick. I think it's great that. I think it's great to raise awareness, but the reality is, the reality of, you know, weathering is that, you know, coastal weathering. If you think about the particle collisions of, imagine a high energy beach and think about all the particle collisions, you know, that's what you need in order for the olivine to break down rapidly. So putting it on a train line is not going to make a lot of difference. It's just going to take a long time. Having said that, there are you know, valid research avenues within land weathering that I'm glad people are pursuing. In particular, there's some interesting stuff around soil. So getting basalt rocks and putting them on fields and using a combination of that and certain kinds of plants that basically combine agriculture with weathering and capture carbon dioxide in the soil. And there's recently a paper in Nature about that. So you know, there's definitely some interesting research in adjacent fields going on there, but frankly, you know, if other people start doing more green sand stuff, then you know, we're excited about that, and we're happy to help and collaborate.
And actually, another part of perhaps also that question is a bit about timing. Do you already have an idea of how fast the olivine is taking up the CO2? Because so like where I'm coming from is also a bit, so if you plant a tree now, you can basically already discount all the CO2 emissions it's going to take up in the next 40 years. Whereas of course, like you never know if something happens to that tree in the meantime and who is to be held accountable. So I also wonder, like for your technology, what are your thoughts on that, and how will you like address that?
Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, plant a tree today, you don't know when it's going to burn, right? Yeah. Potentially quite soon if you look at California at the moment, unfortunately. I'm looking outside and it's actually incredibly smoky here. Up in Lake Tahoe. So yeah, I mean, the good thing about olivine is that you put it down on the beach, it's gonna dissolve, right? Yeah. There's really not too many other places for it to go, and so you know, the warmer the ocean gets, the more acidic the ocean gets, the more rapidly that's actually going to happen. You know, we don't know exactly how long it's going to take yet, and it's going to depend on the particle size, it's going to depend on the wave energy and the temperature of the water and a number of other factors. And that's one of the things that we're working on developing, is this model that actually enables you to input all those factors, and then it'll spit out the weathering rate. But we're looking at a handful of years for most of the olivine to dissolve.
Yeah. Compared to the train track lines that you suggested was a gimmick, is your process exponentially better than just dropping it on train tracks, or do you have a metric there?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I actually don't know the precise weathering time for the train track, but just intuitively, if you think about if you imagine going to a beach in Hawaii where you've got these huge waves and you've got the particles just banging into each other, you know, and there's been a number of lab experiments that demonstrate olivine breaking down relatively rapidly, you know, in a matter of days and weeks under lab shaker conditions and in flume studies and so on. Whereas, you know, if you just leave olivine on a lab bench, you know, during that same period of time, it's all still going to be there when you get back. So yes, it's orders of magnitude faster.
So Tom,
that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
So yeah, this being the BizModLab, I kind of want to let's do a bit of visioning or brainstorming of, you know, let's say 5-10 years down the road, Vesta has done a great job of sort of proof of concept and created an ecosystem where enhanced weathering and coastal weathering for-profit businesses exist and begin to thrive. What do those businesses look like as far as who are their customers and what problems can they solve for those customers, other than sort of the obvious, selling negative emissions and offsets vis-a-vis the markets. I think we identified one thing with Jack's comment about the beach replenishment, but I kind of want to dive into maybe what are some other ideas of how these businesses might look when this industry is up and running? Or have you thought about this? I'm sure you have.
Jeremy, is that a question? Is that a question for me, or is that a question for the group?
Well, I want to hear from you, Tom, because I'm guessing out of all of us, you've spent far more time thinking about these things than we have to date.
Yeah, and I'd also love to hear any ideas from the group too. I mean, one thing we're definitely thinking about is sensors, right? So this will need to be measured, and there'll need to be custom sensors that can enable that to happen. So that's definitely one business model that hasn't been mentioned. Jason, it sounded like you had a thought to share.
Yeah, I was going to say really hydrogen-powered ships to improve on your life cycle assessment of carbon emissions. I would imagine you've done some kind of LCA already for the mining, the extraction, transportation, and deployment distribution. But again, I would say my speculation would be to incorporate renewables, low carbon alternatives for all of those activities in some way in a sustainable manner.
Yeah, that's well said. And we've done a life cycle assessment, and even when you make all the worst possible assumptions about diesel trucks and basically conventional fossil fuel powered everything at every stage of the supply chain, the net carbon removed is still very, very strong. It's about 90 to 95%. But nonetheless, there could definitely be an ecosystem there. And another thing related to that is ecological mining, right? I mean, mining doesn't have the best reputation for being an environmentally sensitive activity, and there are ways to do it though. There are ways to, for example, after you've made a quarry, to actually restore the land in a way that is actually better than when you started, because it provides a haven for successional species that need disturbed land. And there's not that much disturbed land these days, because it's all either built on or farmed or forest. So there could be business models there too, around ecological mining or quarrying.
Are you seeing Project Vesta here in the longer term defining this whole ecosystem of businesses, since you are a nonprofit?
I mean, I think there's sort of a couple of different ways to answer that question. One is just to say I don't know, to be honest. I mean, right now we're focused on the science of enhanced weathering, and our mission is to galvanize global deployment, and we'll do whatever serves that mission best. And so if that means becoming the sort of auditor of negative emissions, we stop delivering the negative emissions and we become the auditor. That could be one way. But yeah, we're certainly very interested in making sure the ecosystem exists. And so we'll do whatever it makes most sense to do to create that ecosystem.
Yeah, because when I look at this, stepping back on any one of the solutions that are out there of how we take carbon out of the atmosphere, in the end, I see them all interconnected into the same similar buckets, where you've got, carbon being taken out one of multiple ways. What happens with that carbon once it's taken out? But from your perspective, and then I see there's like a monitoring and auditing umbrella over all of this to tie it all together. But from your perspective, you've got to find this mineral, you've got to transport this mineral, you've got a place to put it. All of that can kind of come together, and you still have the umbrella piece where, how do you monitor it? How do you really know how much is being taken out of it? So yeah, I can see that you have the ability of going to places where this mineral is produced potentially as waste and providing that green value to them from a marketing perspective. And then you've got all kinds of places where you may not have as high a capture rate because it's on a beach and it's maybe not as aggressively mixed, but there can be value there to a number of hotel chains that have beaches in front of them, and they can, you know, have the green value there from a marketing perspective, which helps raise awareness of this problem, helps raise awareness of your solution. And then you've got the larger deployments, like you said, where you're putting it in on the seafloor to capture it at, more aggressively. So, but
Yeah.
seeing that big picture, I think, is also key to anybody who wants to get involved and understand. It's a complex problem that the hardest part of it is making that complex problem look simple, or simply understand it, right?
Yeah, agreed. You know, I think you know, just thinking about the future of Project Vesta, I don't see us becoming a, you know, multi-billion-dollar olivine sourcing and, you know, logistics and deployment organization. I think that, you know, we exist to deliver that protocol and model to the world, and there'll be for-profit companies that will start probably about 24 months from now, would be my guess, that will start to form that ecosystem.
Right. But I guess my point is, have you taken a crack at just kind of painting the picture of what that ecosystem looks like, so that because that education part is, I guess, part of what I would expect the nonprofit to be doing as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, so yes and no. I mean, I think we have a sense for what that ecosystem looks like in terms of, you know, the different players in it. We haven't begun yet to draw that out for people and communicate it. But yeah, I mean, I think you basically have, you know, the pillars that you need are, you need the science, you need the advocacy to advocate for policy, you need the logistics, you need the sensing, you need the auditing, and maybe I'm missing, oh yeah, and then you need the marketplaces like Nori, right? So I think those are the key components of the ecosystem.
In the short term, you guys are selling credits to generate a revenue. In the longer term, as you see this ecosystem emerging, do you see yourselves stepping away from selling credits directly and maybe having a middle entity perform that role to manage all the different markets and then get your credits out to those and allocate those? I mean, just thinking business models, it seems like if you want to be a nonprofit to provide education and sign up other people to then go implement your vision, you do the same thing with the credits at some point. I just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I see us getting out of the selling credits game once the ecosystem starts to emerge and private companies sell them, and then Project Vesta can focus on, you know, focus on the, you know, the science and the policy advocacy and that kind of stuff. And right now we're selling credits because we're the only people, you know, or maybe not the only, but certainly one of the only players, you know, kind of able to deliver on those credits. But yeah, I'm definitely looking for others to do that eventually. But as I mentioned earlier, kind of like it will be too soon for, you know, a series of startups to start doing that, because there's no scientific basis for that's demonstrated that it's actually a good idea to do it, and we really need to prove that first. Otherwise, it's going to get a bad name, and the ecosystem can never exist.
Yeah, I suspect you guys will be selling credits for a little while, certainly.
I think the next couple of years probably before the ecosystem really starts to emerge.
And, you know, kind of going back to the original point of this topic, which was the business models, did the founding teams behind this kind of see going as the nonprofit route the best way to quickly get the capital needed to prove out the idea?
Yeah, I mean, basically the idea was a nonprofit will have the scientific credibility to do this, and a for-profit risks, you know, alienating scientists because they suspect the motive. And that's fundamentally the reason.
Are there other carbon removal technologies that are following this model? Just going, you know, trying to prove and develop a market vis-a-vis a nonprofit? I mean, I think it makes a ton of sense. Are you aware of any other technologies that are doing something similar, have a corollary nonprofit to Project Vesta?
Good question. Sure, there are. Jason, you might know.
Thinking of other nonprofits. I mean,
You're on the spot, Jason.
yeah, I know.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
I mean,
Jason, sorry to put you on the spot. I feel like you're
thinking
the
of our,
expert here.
again, thinking about Climeworks, Charm, who are for-profit entities. I don't know of too many. I mean, there's a ton of other .orgs in the space to promote services. Again, Carbon 180 comes to mind. If you look on the Air Miners website, there should be a list of organizations there that has a more complete taxonomy. I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but I would suggest looking there as a resource for potential other nonprofits.
Thanks, Jason.
Airminers.org.
Yeah.
Actually, Airminers is the .org, and we remove credit from all of our events. So there you go.
Yeah, and I guess if you look at something like Project Drawdown's website, then there's probably some examples on there as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, Air Miners is a great place to look.
Yeah.
Guys, I apologize. I have to jump. I have a call. To jump to my next call. But
Thanks, Tom.
Actually,
Tom, we really appreciate you. Appreciate your time. This is fascinating. We'll have a recording of this. If you have any interest, just shoot me an email and I can get you a recording of the conversation. And yeah, thank you again for joining. I thought it was really helpful and great conversation today. So appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Jason, go ahead.
Ecosia, the web browser, that is a certified B Corporation out of Germany that plants trees for web searching. So sorry about that. That's the.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Great example. Yeah, and thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. ProjectVesta.org, and like I mentioned at the beginning, if you know of any philanthropists in the space, then definitely point them in my direction.
We certainly will.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Bye.
All right, guys, and I've got to jump too. If anyone would like to stay on the line, I can flip the host privileges over to someone else and step away. Otherwise, we will conclude for the day today.
Okay, have a good day.
Thanks to you
Bye.
guys.
Thanks
Good,
everyone
thank
for joining. Good to see you all.
Yeah.
We'll see you in the Slack channel.
And we're done.